Hi everyone, I'm Lynn Martin, President of the New York Stock Exchange, speaking to you from right above our iconic trading floor. I'm thrilled to welcome you here for this important conversation on cybersecurity, especially as companies prepare to comply with cyber governance policies and practices stemming from new regulations issued by both the SEC and the New York Department of Financial Services. Today's discussion features industry-leading experts in cyber risk who will share key insights for business leaders and their boards of directors to keep top of mind this year as these new regulations go into effect. Our panelists today include Kevin Mandia, the CEO of Mandiant, Brian Stafford, CEO of Diligent, Betsy Atkins, CEO of Baja Corp, and Phil Venables, Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Google Cloud. The panelists will discuss how technology innovation aids in protection against cybersecurity threats, including phishing, ransomware, and data breaches. With the technology and data we have at our fingertips today comes the responsibility to properly prepare for business risk, especially cyber threats. And as a programmer and data scientist by trade, I understand firsthand the important role that data and technology play in transforming business as we know it. At the NYSE, we're no strangers to innovation. We are home to a community of over 2,400 icons and entrepreneurs taking on the biggest challenges our society faces today, including cybersecurity. It's our job to help support our listed companies through these challenges with the tools and guidance they need to succeed in the ever-evolving business landscape. Today's discussion will be full of valuable insights for business leaders looking to ensure their organizations are cyber ready. We thank you for joining this important conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to Phil for the panel discussion.
Well, thank you, Lynn, for welcoming us and kicking off our discussion today. So we're gonna jump right in. First of all, I just want to ask a question of Betsy. So as a director that's served on multiple boards and like you're widely connected across the board community, what are you seeing these days as the pressures on boards to adopt different and perhaps more intense cyber governance policies, and does this represent any kind of change for how cyber is covered in those boards, whether it's a dedicated topic or part of the broader coverage of the audit committee? What's going on out there?
Well, I think it's actually really an important thing for boards to think about how they constitute the committees, how they allocate their time and their resources to do proper cyber oversight. So, in the past, it was stuck in the audit committee, who already has such a long agenda. It could be 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 hours, depending on the length of an audit committee. So I do think taking cyber and putting it in a dedicated location with focus is really important. If you look at the Fortune 500 companies, 12% of them have a tech committee now. I think you could do a dedicated tech committee. Also, you could look at the governance committee. The workload, the remit is light, and they have capacity. And rather than form another committee, you could take cyber, and you could take data privacy, you could take the ESG oversight, and the overall focus on tech that companies need to do, and you could wrap that into the governance committee or make it a dedicated tech committee. I think that you need to have at least 2 cyber certified board members if they're going to be able to do good enough oversight and understand the NIST framework, what are the policies and the procedures behind it. And with the new SEC rule, we can only expect a lot more scrutiny. So it's going to be important that you're actually doing cyber briefings to the board and that you're, engaging in this. The statistics would say it's getting to be more and more critical. You've got KPMG saying that for 2022, for example, 62% of boards had a cyber or a data breach. So it's an epidemic. I think it needs the focus of either a new committee, a tech committee, or you take all of those forward-looking risks, cyber, data privacy, tech enablement, ESG, and you change the breadth of the governance committee.
No, it's kind of interesting. I mean, certainly, I think, from our perspective, as we work with our customers at Google, we see some alignment with a tech committee or tech strategies. We see a lot of usefulness in that, because a lot of the foundational cybersecurity controls are part of a technology modernization effort in the company. And I think, Kevin, just kind of turning to you as you look back at 22 and think about what's going on in 2023, what are some of the bigger cybersecurity threats and incidents that you're seeing, particularly the ones that make it to the board level in terms of severity?
Well, Phil, it's going to sound like bad news for a minute and a half, and then I'll end on the good news. But realize the basis for everything I'm about to say really comes from frontline experience with about 1,000 people, over 1,000 people responding to over 1,000 breaches over the last 12 months. And when we respond to these breaches, it sounds tactical, like we bungee in and figure out what happened, but we also have to figure out what to do about it. But more importantly, we get that front seat to the new and novel attacks that are circumventing the traditional safeguards that everybody has. So first, the bad news, but it's not surprising. We're seeing more of everything. In the 1,000+ breaches or investigations that we did in 2022, we're seeing more threat groups, more threat actors, more malware, more zero-day attacks, meaning attacks that don't have a patch to them, Phil, meaning they're going to work if they can get those packets to your system. But that's a double-edged sword on the 0 days, is also a little bit of good news. Seeing more supply chain breaches, more false claims, where people are going to say they've compromised your organization, but they really didn't. Yet they're saying they did. They're hurting your reputation. They're posting data that they got somewhere else that might be public data, just to hurt organizations somehow. More public disclosures, more government involvement. And then just kind of on the specifics, two things I'd point out that we saw in 2022 that were a little different than in prior years is during the conflict in Ukraine, we'd expect to see great innovation on offense from the Russian government. It is my opinion we saw far greater innovation on offense in cyberspace by the Chinese government. So they're the ones that, to me, had more new and novel attacks in 2022 than any other nation or any other financially motivated criminal group. And then the second thing that kind of emerged in 2022 is a lot more hacking for fun, fame, and financial gain. I don't know how else to describe it, Phil, but there were a bunch of groups that would hack in. They were erratic, they were immature, they weren't hacking for money, they were publicly shaming organizations, they hit high-profile targets, they broke in primarily with social engineering and really made the breach as painful as possible, sometimes with physical threats to executives, but really there was nothing these companies could do to thwart that once it happened. You're making the least bad of many different bad decisions. And that was new to us. These are the kind of threat groups that dial into your conference calls when you're talking about the breach and really just bring the pain. So let's end with some good news, because I just said there's more of everything bad, Phil, and everybody's like, thanks a lot, Kevin. We can't prepare for nothing but bad. I actually believe all of us in the cybersecurity community are shortening or decreasing what I call the security gap, meaning from the moment there's a new and novel attack or 0 day to the moment the vast majority of companies can be protected by it. Based on government partnerships, the private sector, we have massively shortened that window. So I'll leave you with that as the good news. Even though there's more 0 days being used, the positive to that is that we're all shutting and locking our front doors, and the offense now has to create exploits that don't have patches, and that's making it more expensive for the offense. So we've done those two things. So that kind of summarizes 2022, Phil.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic comment, because it's interesting. I was in a board meeting of one of our customers last week, and they were reflecting on a very similar point in having spent a lot of time and energy modernizing their technology infrastructure, improving a lot of their practices. they've seen a kind of a decrease in incidents, and also the incidents they have are more containable. And I think it was great to see that the board engaged with the management team on that kind of topic. And I think you're just kind of now, turning to Brian, both, Betsy and Kevin have kind of highlighted this, but with some of the new and proposed regulations coming that are driving more and deeper board engagement, and also just having to demonstrate more board expertise on this. How do you think through what level of proficiency does a board member need, or the board in aggregate? And is there anything as we go into 2023 to adapt to these potential and actual regulatory changes? What are you recommending to boards about how to get ready for those?
Yeah, Phil, and Betsy mentioned this, but I think the SEC's proposed regulation requiring cybersecurity expertise on boards is a really, really big deal. You probably hear more in the press about ESG and the role of ESG in the boards, but the proposed regulation from the SEC is actually going to require boards to potentially reshape and add different people to their boards in a different way than any other proposed regulation might. And so as a board, you have to seriously take a look at and say, do I need to add a CIO or a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, to your board to add that level of expertise? Most boards do not have that today. And it's a challenging issue for boards, where boards typically, you want a mix of generalists and you want people who are deep in different areas. And this is where the SEC says it's really going to be a requirement to make sure that you have people that are deep in different areas. And so what does it mean for a board? How do you actually increase your level of vigilance and awareness? It means making sure that you have cyber training for all the employees of the company. How good is your in-house cyber team and your CISO pushing on that? Are you actually implementing the cutting edge tools that you need for your board? Are you using the right external cyber penetration vendors? And do you have the right experts, like Kevin mentioned, to kind of come in the board and actually go and kick the tires and pressure test? It really comes down to, do you as a board member know the right questions to ask of the organization to help to make sure you can stay ahead of things? And then after that's all said and done, it's then moving to the level of, if there is attack, if there is a breach, how prepared are you to respond? And so it's what boards, as Betsy noted, have been dealing with over the course of the last X number of years. But the SEC has just raised the bar, or proposed raising the bar on just what the level of expertise and due diligence is required to make sure that the right oversight is provided. It's one of the reasons why we at Diligent have launched a cyber risk certification training to make sure that all board members can get that basic set of information to make sure that they can ask those deeper, those second level questions into the organization, the CEO, the CISO, and the CIO.
No, I think that's a great point, because while it's important to have designated cybersecurity and broader technology risk expertise, having that broad array of education for the whole board to be able to oversee this risk, just like any other first-class strategic business risk, is going to be important. And certainly, we're looking forward to partnering on providing as much information and help as we can to what you do with boards. And this is again is probably a good flag back to Kevin. You mentioned that you've done a lot of work with boards when they're when they're going through their incident response, or when they're doing their kind of health checks or preparedness. What's some of the things, when you sit in front of a board and they're asking you questions and you think, wow, I wish all boards would ask those questions? What's some of the major indicators of great questions that I think all of the board members listening today should probably take back into their own organizations?
Well, you're going to have to ask first and foremost, and it's not asked this way, Phil, but I'm going to translate it from the ways it's asked. How good are we at security? And when boards ask that, they sometimes mean, how good is our people? How good is our security posture? And a lot of companies will go into the board and they'll just lay down, here's our 4-dimensional compliance dashboard, and we're good to go. Everything's in the green. We have controls, we have people assigned, double thumbs up. Well, that's every single victim company I've responded to that's going through a major breach. They were compliant and deemed compliant sometimes within weeks of a major breach. So I translate that to the how good are we question that we constantly get. How resilient are we? Meaning, can we operate through compromise, operate after ransomware, or at least accelerate recovery So that's the second question. One, how good are we? How resilient are we? And ultimately what they're really asking is just what is our risk? You know, if you need a framework, in my opinion, if I'm a CISO out there, I would try to present a framework to the board that's all risk-based. Here are the threats we're worried about. Here's what we're doing to mitigate those threats. And here we are testing to see if those threats can become a reality. Here's what would happen if those threats became a reality, meaning its impact on business. And then here are the things that we're willing to accept. You know, we're not covering for this, whatever that may be. And not every company can protect every asset the same way, and potentially maybe they shouldn't. So those are the top three questions. How good are we at security? How resilient are we? And what is our risk? And I'll just really briefly comment. So how do you get that answer? And how good are we? Probably the easiest thing to do as a board is get some people to do what's called a red team or a purple team against your network. Emulate the threats, shoot the bullets at your network and see how you do. You just want to be able to do it in a safe way so it doesn't disrupt business. When it comes to how resilient are we, one of the things I've seen companies do is what I call a red lever event. Check ahead of time, can you operate your business off the internet? Can you do it? Can you even get off the internet should you choose to do so, by the way, which is another one. And practice red lever events so that if there is a catastrophic, could be cyber incident, could actually be an earthquake. How well do you recover the business or operate the business? Because I've seen a lot of businesses fail to some extent during a cyber breach because they couldn't operate the old-fashioned way, manually. And then in regards to what is risk, that's something that I think every board's very familiar with, Phil. So I will punt that one to the folks listening to this.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I've definitely seen more boards really probe their kind of risk, security, and tech leadership on whether they're doing those so-called red teaming exercises. You know, and some of the kind of, you know, spending a few minutes at the board meeting kind of probing about whether they're kind of prepared to do those kind of things you talked about. It's kind of, I see more and more boards doing that. I mean, Brian, you know, you talked about kind of the work you're doing across the director community. I mean, are these, you know, are you hearing other types of questions and priorities coming up for how boards think about becoming cyber ready, to coin a phrase?
Look, I think Kevin hit on the kind of key questions. I think the point that resonates with me is whenever I talk to a board member or a board after the CISO has come in and made their pitch around, you know, here's what our risk factors are, and you sit down with a board member afterwards and say, do you feel better or worse after that conversation? And I think it goes to the general sense of, you know, do you understand the risks? How good is your team who's assessing them? And do you feel prepared enough? And I think, unfortunately, not enough boards walk away feeling that level of preparedness, which is why they lean on other experts, other tools. The wargaming is incredibly important, but I think board members will feel better getting deeper themselves into understanding what the next order questions are when their internal security team is standing in front of them and giving them a lay of the land on what the risks are and how secure we should feel.
Yeah, no, it's a good example because I think definitely that degree of engagement on this topic from the board is just vital, just like you see on other crucial risks. I mean, coming back to Betsy, I mean, you know, you've served on over 30 public boards, and as part of that experience, you've dealt with an organization having cyber breaches. So, you know, when you look across all of that experience, what are the things that you've learned and taken away? And when you look back, is there anything that you wish you could have done differently that, you know, would be sage advice to, you know, the directors listening today?
Well, you do learn, and having lived through a few cyber breaches, I think the thing that I've learned that I would really suggest that everybody listening consider is ask your management team to actually show what Kevin was referring to. What is the post-breach plan? And then actually once a year, whether it's in your new tech committee or your reconstituted governance committee, go through the actual tabletop exercise, the crisis planning. because you'll find out there's all kinds of gaps. Who is your forensic outside specialist? Maybe you're lucky enough that you have Kevin's cell number on speed dial, but for most of us, we don't. So who's the forensic that you're going to use? Who's the contact at FBI and law enforcement? Who's the outside law firm who's got the cyber specialist? Who's your PR firm? And then actually go through what happens, for example, in a ransomware. It may turn out, even if you want to pay, the cyber criminal is on the OFAC terrorist list, you can't pay. So, you have to go through those actual exercises. And then I would look at, the data says, and it was mentioned earlier, I think by Kevin, the supply chain is one of the most vulnerable areas. About 40% of the breaches come through the supply chain. At Volvo, we were breached. It came through the dealer network. Your vendors are small. They can't invest in the cyber protection necessary. The car dealers, the local car dealer, everybody think about your car dealer. Do you think they have good cyber? They probably don't. So, beware of where it comes from and focus your energy there, probe and ask those questions. M&A is another area. You buy a small company, they haven't got the cyber protection. So I think those are some things. I do think actually changing your penetration testing company every year is great. I think looking at investing now in having a third-party cyber firm like a managed services provider who tells you about the attacks and backs up your own CISO organization is a good thing. And the other thing to think about, I haven't had to face it yet, but we're all going to, which is in the new SEC regulation, it requires that after 4 days after a breach, you have to communicate the materiality of the breach. Well, you probably aren't even done doing the assessment. And who is going to calculate that materiality? Who is that in the organization? And how are you going to attest to the accuracy? So another anxiety. But at the end of it all, I do think, given the amount of scrutiny we're going to face, I would at least do 2 cyber briefings to the full board a year. And assuming you're going to be breached and you've gotten your thoughts together, when you actually go through it, I would really urge that you do not abdicate your decision making to the outside experts. You're there as a director. It's up to you to make the business judgment and make that call.
No, I think that's a fantastic point, and and I also all of those were great points, but I love the supply chain point, because again, I see a lot of boards not connecting the risks between their third party and sometimes even fourth and fifth party risk assessments with their procurement team and their risk team and their security team. And given that pretty much every organization now is dependent ever more on their physical and digital supply chain, that just becomes really important. Unfortunately, we're drawing to a close in our time now. I think we'd probably love to go on for hours on this, but I just want to start wrapping up and just ask each of you to just give us like a quick lightning round, quick takeaway that you want people to take away from this. So I'll start with Kevin and then Brian and then Betsy, and then I'll wrap up. Kevin.
2 things playing off what Betsy said. One, on the tabletop exercise, I think every board should be doing at least 1 a year. It's got to be a scenario that really matters to your organization. Make it the one that hurts the most and simulate that it became real. It only takes 30 minutes to an hour if you want to do it that fast, but you learn the calm lanes that need to exist to be successful right then as you ask those questions and go through it. And the second thing is going back to how do you feel? Every time a CISO briefs you and everything's in the green, the board's probably not going to believe it. Really? We're in the green? If the CISO briefs and everything's in the red, the board's upset. And if everything's in yellow, the board doesn't even know how to feel. The only thing that made me feel good as a board member and a CEO is if the red team doesn't get in 5 days, I felt pretty good, because I think it withstands third-party inspection to say, what more do you want me to do? I just had 5 of the best hackers on the planet attack my networks for 5 days, and they didn't get in. And I don't know what else gives you that sense of confidence other than actively testing. And I love Betsy's point. Use a different group to do it. Sometimes familiarity is a good thing, but ultimately you want to simulate different adversaries. And I don't know what more you really can do. So I would recommend those two things: tabletop, the scenario that you're most worried about, and have somebody structurally attack your network and see what the results are.
Brian?
Yeah, I would just say, look, we all sit in boardrooms, and you feel the level of rigor of the questionings that get asked around company performance. The SEC has up the bar in what the requirement is for boards, and I would just make sure that every director out there feels like he or she knows enough to ask the same detailed questions, the follow-up questions, the next level questions of your cyber team, of your CISO and their team, to make sure you're really pressure testing and doing the work required to validate how secure you are and how secure your policies are.
Right, Betsy?
Well, none of us want to end up like Equifax. So I think it's really important that we get briefed, and bringing in outside experts to brief the board is really valuable. So, invite someone like Kevin to come, who's a true global forensic expert and can, guide you of what are the risks, I think is part of what you do, and get at least 2 certified board members, better 3 who are truly cyber certified, because when you get a core of people who really understand it, then they're able to do better oversight. They're better to, able to really work with the CISO and the IT team and understand the risks a little more in depth. And actually, don't be frightened. Do the work. Just start. It's not as overwhelming as it sounds. So dive in.
All right. Well, that's a great point to end on. I just kind of like to add my own, which just echoes what Betsy just said, which is, in all of my experience on boards, working with boards, and all of what we do here at Google Cloud, probably the most important thing is to just treat this as a first-class business risk and not get frightened by the technical complexities, because there are many other complex business risks we all deal with. And this is another one, albeit a new and important one for many organizations. And there's plenty of help out there from people like myself and Kevin and all the other people that you have in your networks. And certainly one of the things we're going to be doing is partnering with Diligent on future topics like this, and hopefully bringing more kind of content targeted to this problem at a board level, so that you'll have more resources to work on this. So with that, I'd like to thank Betsy, Kevin, and Brian. I think it was a great discussion, and best of luck out there in the cyber landscape, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.